BioBurn is a sustainable biomass processing company based in Atlantic Canada. Their mobile equipment burns wood waste using a carbon neutral process. How can this be? How can this produce lower emissions like 88% less carbon monoxide or 69% fewer particles? Well, Joe Lewis of BioBurn Pros is here to tell us how. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell me about your company. It's BioBurn Pros, and it really amazes me because a lot of people think, burning, carbon being released, but you do it a different way. You do it a more sustainable way, right?
That's right. So BioBurn Pros, we're a biomass processing company, more on the wood and vegetative waste side of things. And what we do is we employ air curtain burner technology. And the technology itself, it reduces emissions, it reduces smoke being released in the atmosphere by way of the air curtain burner. And what it is, basically, it's high pressure air. It's being forced into the fire, which allows it to burn at extremely high temperatures, up to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, providing almost a complete combustion of the material. We do a 99% reduction of feedstock to residual char and ash. So it's a very clean process. And based on the high pressure air that's being blown through the manifold, it recaptures all the smoke and particulate and it reburns. So it's very clean burning.
How long? Like I know, how long does it take to burn? Like how long does it, if you have, I guess, give me an example of how long it would take for things to burn down, I guess.
Yeah, so one comparison we use for the technology is basically what you could burn in an open pit in a day is what we burn per hour. So anywhere from 7 to 9 tons an hour is what we're burning in our burn chamber. So it's quite a bit. We're doing anywhere 70 to 90 tons. If you get a really dry feedstock or some very brushy, quick burning materials, we can even see those average numbers go up quite a bit.
That's right. So the carbon neutral effect that's taking place, the residual is heat, right? And I guess that's called bioenergy. So what I'm learning, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So during the burn process, with the high temperatures, basically we have a secondary system that can marry into the burn chamber. And what it does, it has a hood vent that will kind of regulate how much heat it's taking from the fire. And through that, it runs it through a cooling and heating system that turns a turbine, and it can generate up to 300 kilowatts of energy per hour. And once we get into that side of things, the system itself will consume about 50 kilowatts of that per hour. So you're doing about 250 kilowatts an hour of power generation. And we're able to store that into battery banks, which we call the battery charger, or the biocharger.
Well, that leads up to what I was just going to ask next is, there's a new concept that you're working on, and it's just about that. It's about stored energy because there's a lot being created during this process.
That's right.
So you come up with this idea, which is really kind of cool. It's a new concept, right?
Right. And I can't say I personally came up with the idea. We work exclusively with a company called Air Burners, and they're the patented manufacturer of the technology. And we've got the exclusive rights for Atlantic Canada for this technology. And by all means, there's conversations going on. But what they've developed here with this biocharger is an ability for us to now electrify forestry equipment or rural sites that are away from a power grid that traditionally rely heavily on diesel generators. And even with the forestry setting, you need to truck in your fuels to run your excavators or your forwarders and harvesters and all your equipment. With the biocharger, we can store 750 kilowatts of energy per 750,000 kilowatt hours of energy, sorry. And that allows us to then overnight, when you're not using the equipment, you can then plug it in and charge the equipment, cell phones, anything electrified on site. And with the rural settings where they're so heavily dependent on fossil fuels and diesel for their
Right.
generators to run their lights at night,
Hmm.
it could be a mining setting, it could be just a rural community. It then allows them to basically charge some batteries up and they can run at night off these battery banks.
Hurricane Fiona was devastating to this area. And I know that BioBurn fuels was really helpful in a way of removing a lot of the waste, right?
That's right. Yeah. So with Fiona, so far most of our projects have been storm debris remediation. A lot of local landfills are holding this material, and they're not typically supposed to under normal regulations, but under emergency settings, they get authorization to store it at these facilities. So a lot of what we've done to date has been repatriating landfills so that they can extend the life cycle of landfill. They don't need to open new cells, waste cells. And so, Hurricane Fiona was really the birth of this business. We have a excavation and groundwork background before we had started BioBurn Pros. And we were just, Fiona hit and it, knocked
Yeah.
trees down all over the province in Atlantic Canada. And we were getting hired to go clean this up and truck the stuff to local dumping stations. And then we had seen the municipalities were then taking the burden of trucking this stuff elsewhere. So
Which adds to, there's a lot of carbon, there's a lot of everything being added there. Yeah.
right, and we can show up at these locations and eliminate all the tub grinders, which are heavy emitting equipment. We can eliminate the mass amounts of equipment just to load the trucks, and thousands of trucks can be eliminated from the roads, which in turn saves a bit of the local infrastructure and roadways, less wear and tear. So we can really localize the waste processing and go site to site and just clean up that way.
And I love the idea of how burning the low grade wood, I guess it's important to point out that it's stumps. It's not precious, cedar or oak. It's really the lower grade stuff. But I love how it can repatriate the soil.
That's right. Yeah. So we didn't want to, obviously prime lumbers. There's so much great use for that, from stud lumber for building homes to multiple uses, even firewood for heating homes. But with where we found a great niche was in that low grade stuff, like you mentioned. And typically, when it came to stumps, a lot of them are old growth stumps. They're pretty big. They don't fit in the grinders or the chippers. And we're able to process those in our burners. Our main industrial burner is the S223 air curtain burner. And it's got a 22-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot burn chamber. So you can fit a whole log in there if it is a low grade log, but a whole bunch of waste in there. And at the end of the burn phase, you're left with biochar or biocoal, depending on how far into the burn you get with it. But we're able to take that soil and then or that biochar and repatriate the soil on site. So that allows us to sequester the carbon, put it right back into the ground immediately.
That's awesome. I was doing some homework on your company and I saw somewhere the mention of transfer station. And what is that?
So a transfer station is just like a local dump site, basically. We've been kicking a few names around for what that might be called, like a stump dump or brush dump.
Yeah.
But essentially, where this is coming from is, we've got thousands of businesses locally here that are in the land clearing, excavation, landscaping business, and they've got little to no options for dumping locations for this material.
Yeah, we're
So what
running out of
that's leading
space.
to is a
Yeah.
whole bunch of illegal dumping, unregulated dumping, untaxed, revenues being paid in cash to these people that are accepting it. And it's being left in these locations where essentially it's becoming a hazard.
Mhm.
It's decomposing, off-gassing methane, it's leachate into the ground, dries up and becomes a wildfire risk. So we have some rough numbers from working with the province to get an idea on how much of this product is being, generated annually. Um, and it's substantial. So if we are able to open a central location, we can give residents a spot to bring this stuff when they're clearing out their own land, or companies. And if the volumes are sufficient enough, we can then, instead of doing prescribed burns at these set locations, we'll have an ongoing burn location where power generation really makes sense because we can continually burn,
Yeah,
continually
just
charge
feed the beast.
batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that idea because it would be great for, because there's a heavy reliance on diesel generators in northern Canada, and
Hmm.
something like this, would that help
Yeah,
those
we
areas?
actually had last year we were part of the net zero pitch competition where we presented the biocharger technology, and we had heard from northern Manitoba and the Canadian Battery Association. We're working with some of these northern ice communities, and they're completely reliant on diesel generators. And they need to truck this diesel in during the winter months, and the winter's getting shorter every year with climate change. The communities are growing, so the demand on power is increasing. And with these battery banks and the biocharger, we could essentially truck this in, and they can use. They're surrounded by forests and woods, and they can do their own sustainable forestry practices and clean up, prevent wildfire, create jobs, and use all that residual that's created in these processes to power their towns.
Hmm, interesting. What's next for you guys? I mean, you're growing. You have a concept that you're working on. What does the next 6 months to a year look like for you?
So we're very happy with the way 2024 went for us. We were able to validate the technology. We were able to complete several contracts. We were able to do even better than we expected. We were ahead of time and under budget on every project, which is the ultimate goal for the customer and for us. But the future is, right now we're fighting a lot of regulations in the provinces around burning. You
Hmm.
say the word fire and it inherently scares people. They
Yeah.
think smoke, they think people and assets, right? So for us, we're very committed to continuing getting advocacy for what we're doing. We're working hard with Fire Smart here locally, which is a national fire prevention program to mitigate wildfires in communities and do cleanups. But we really want to grow awareness. We've invested into some more smaller air burners, which are trailer mounted, so we can provide a more affordable solution as well. Right now, we had the big S223 burner, which is more geared for the industrial setting. And we really needed to get into the agriculture, forestry, and residential land clearing side of things. But logistically, it just didn't make sense with a giant industrial burner to truck that around. So, fortunately, Air Burners has several models of these air curtain burners, and we recently invested into some of the smaller units to grow our fleet. We can also move that around and attend more seminars and more conferences and just grow awareness of what we're up to and the benefits for communities. We've been very involved with local emergency management offices and emergency preparedness offices, and they've been very excited for what we're able to do. It not only cuts costs for taxpayers, but
Hmm.
it's a viable solution today. It's not a unicorn idea. We can move the unit tomorrow and really get going. So
Hmm.
that's the focus, just to keep going, keep growing, and just provide other ways to solve the problems around wood waste.
I have a little bit of an odd question, but those. I know you focus on industrial, but I'm curious on the residential side of things. Those solo stoves.
Yeah,
They say that they're smokeless, or you've got something. Is that kind of like the same thing, that the same idea?
there is a product on the market. So I'm an avid hiker and backwoods camper, and I do a lot of trout fishing in some pretty deep wood spots. And I've been using for a lot of years something called a BioLite, which is basically a little
Right.
can, and it's got a little battery bank that goes on the side with a blower, and it blows air into the can to burn the little fire, and then the heat charges the battery that runs the blower that keeps the fire going. And it's really circular, and it's pretty much the same idea on a much
Okay.
larger scale. And so when we did come across these air burners, I had that aha moment. I've actually been using one of these for
There
years
you
on a much
go.
smaller scale. Yeah, so
Yeah,
very
they're
similar.
they're very popular with, yeah, with hikers and such. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining me today, and to hear about your company, and as you go forward, it's exciting times. I see it as a really great win for the province.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and talk to everyone about it. That's great. Thank you.
Lower emissions, fewer particles, and reduced creosote buildup. Who knew that you could burn wood waste sustainably? This podcast is sponsored by the province of Nova Scotia and the Smart Energy event. I'm your host, Maria McGowan. Thanks so much for listening in today.